Ever get that feeling like something big's about to happen, even though things seem kind of calm?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
That's kind of what we're looking at today, the era of good feelings
Yeah.
during James Monroe's presidency.
Right.
On the surface, peaceful, unified time. But a lot more to the story.
Yeah, lots going on under the surface.
We're going to find some serious tension simmering.
Definitely some tension.
Surprising Supreme Court decisions, a national economic crisis, and, oh yeah, the slavery debate's back.
Front and center.
Nearly tore the nation apart.
Absolutely. It's fascinating how these labels, like era of good feelings, get attached to historical periods.
Right.
They never quite capture the complexity.
No, they don't.
So yeah, War of 1812 over, Federalist Party fading.
Sure.
But doesn't mean there weren't major issues.
No, definitely not. So let's unpack this era of good feelings.
Okay.
One of the most significant developments in the Supreme Court under Chief Justice John Marshall,
Right.
they really started flexing their muscles.
You're absolutely right. Marshall, appointed by John Adams years earlier,
Right.
staunch Federalist,
He was.
issued a series of rulings that had a profound and lasting impact.
Yeah.
The balance of power between the federal government and the states.
So he strengthened the federal government.
Essentially, yes.
Mm.
And laid the groundwork for the growth of corporations
Okay.
as we know them today.
Wow. Let's dive into a few of those cases.
Sure.
First up, Dartmouth College v. Woodward in 1819. Now, this case might seem like a small potatoes college squabble.
Okay.
You have this small college in New Hampshire.
Right.
State legislature wants to take it over.
Make it public.
Make it a public institution, right? But the college trustees said, hold on a minute. We're not going down without a fight.
They hired Daniel Webster,
Oh, wow.
who would later become a famous senator,
Wow.
to argue their case.
Before the Supreme Court.
That's right. And Webster's argument, brilliant.
Clearly.
He said that the college's original charter granted by King George III back in 1769
Wow.
was a contract, and the state couldn't just waltz in and break it.
Oh, interesting. So
Yeah.
what happened?
John Marshall agreed with him.
Really?
He ruled that the Constitution protects contracts,
Yeah.
even those made between states and private institutions.
That's a big deal.
It is. This case is still cited today
Really?
because it really cemented the legal foundation for modern corporations.
Wow. It's incredible how a small case about a college in New Hampshire
Right.
could have such a far-reaching impact.
Absolutely. This case reflects Marshall's commitment to a strong federal government
Okay.
and the protection of property rights, which were core Federalist principles.
Makes sense.
It set a precedent for limiting state power
Okay.
and safeguarding the interests of private entities.
Then we have McCulloch v. Maryland,
Yes.
also in 1819.
Right?
This time it was about whether a state could tax the national bank.
Right.
You had the state of Maryland wanting to tax the Baltimore branch
Of the Second Bank of the United States.
of the Second Bank of the United States.
Yeah.
But James McCulloch, the bank's cashier, stood his ground,
Right.
arguing that a state couldn't impose taxes
On a federal institution.
on a federal institution.
Yeah, showdown.
Yeah.
State versus federal authority.
Wow. So what happened?
The case went all the way to the Supreme Court.
Of course.
And Marshall, again, sided with the federal government.
Oh, wow.
He famously declared, "The power to tax is the power to destroy,"
Really?
asserting that states couldn't interfere with the operations of the federal government.
Wow. So was this a power grab by the federal government?
Well,
Or was it a necessary step to ensure a stable national economy?
that's a question that historians still debate today.
I bet.
What's crucial here is that Marshall invoked the idea of implied powers.
Implied powers.
Yeah, he argued that even though the Constitution didn't explicitly say the federal government could create a bank,
Right.
it had implied powers to do so, to carry out its other responsibilities.
Like regulating commerce.
Exactly.
That's a pretty significant expansion of federal power, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. This decision set a precedent for a broader interpretation of the Constitution
Okay.
and solidified the federal government's role in national affairs.
Wow. It's remarkable how this debate about the balance of power between the states and the federal government
Right.
is still relevant today.
It is
We're still grappling with these questions.
in our modern political landscape.
Absolutely. And Marshall wasn't done yet.
No, he wasn't.
We also have Gibbons v. Ogden in 1824, a case about, of all things,
Steamboat monopolies
steamboat monopolies
on the Hudson River.
on the Hudson River. Now, you might be thinking, okay, steamboats, this seems pretty niche.
Right.
But Trust me, this case had a huge impact
They did.
on interstate commerce.
So New York had granted a steamboat monopoly
Okay,
to a company,
right.
but another company wanted to operate on the same route. And this sparked a legal battle
Of course.
that ultimately landed in the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
The court ruled in favor of the company that wanted to compete,
Okay.
striking down the state-granted monopoly.
So basically, Marshall and the Supreme Court were saying, hey, states, you can't just restrict interstate commerce.
Right.
That's the federal government's domain.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The Gibbons v. Ogden decision solidified the federal government's authority to regulate interstate commerce,
Okay.
a power that has shaped the American economy ever since.
It's incredible how these three cases,
Dartmouth College v. Woodward,
Dartmouth College v. Woodward,
McCulloch v. Maryland.
McCulloch v. Maryland, and Gibbons v. Ogden,
Right.
all decided during this seemingly quiet era of good feelings,
Right.
had such a lasting impact on the balance of power
They did.
in the United States.
These decisions established key legal precedents
Yeah.
that are still cited and debated today.
I can imagine.
They fundamentally shaped the relationship between the federal government and the states.
Okay. And they laid the groundwork for the growth of corporations and the expansion of federal power.
But while these legal battles were raging,
Right.
the country was also facing an economic crisis.
That's right.
The Panic of 1819.
The Panic of 1890.
And remember those wildcat banks we mentioned earlier?
Oh, yeah.
Well, they played a significant role
They did.
in this economic downturn.
Back then, banking regulations were much looser
Really?
than they are today.
Okay.
Many state-chartered banks,
Right.
sometimes called wildcat banks,
Wildcat banks.
because they were often located in remote areas,
Oh, okay.
are printing their own paper money
Wow.
without sufficient backing.
Wow. That's crazy.
This created a lot of chaos
I bet.
and instability in the economy.
It's almost hard to imagine now,
It is.
but a $10 bill from one bank
Right.
might be worth less than a $5 bill from another bank.
Exactly. Confusing and volatile system.
Wow. So what happened? The Second Bank of the United States, chartered by the federal government,
Right.
was trying to regulate the currency
Makes sense.
and rein in these wildcat banks.
Okay.
But its efforts to tighten credit
Uh-oh.
led to a credit crunch,
Oh, no.
which triggered bank failures and widespread economic hardship.
You have this perfect storm brewing.
We do.
Unregulated banks,
Mm-hmm.
a credit crunch.
Uh-huh.
And to make matters worse, Europe was experiencing its own economic woes.
That's right. Reduced demand for American goods overseas
Yeah.
further exacerbated the situation.
So basically everything's falling apart.
Pretty much.
What did the government do in response to this crisis?
Well, not much.
So people were struggling, businesses were failing,
Right.
and the government basically stood by and said, tough luck, figure it out yourselves.
Pretty much. President Monroe
Cunning.
believed in a limited role for the government in economic matters.
I see. So what happened?
It took years for the economy to recover. And the Panic of 1819 left a lasting impact
Okay.
on American attitudes toward banks and government intervention in the economy.
Makes sense.
It sparked debates that are still relevant today
Really?
about the role of government
Oh, okay.
in regulating the financial system and providing economic relief.
So we've got a powerful Supreme Court
Right.
reshaping the balance of power,
Uh-huh.
an economy in turmoil.
Yep.
And now things are about to get even more heated.
Oh, yeah.
The question of slavery,
Right.
which had been simmering beneath the surface,
Uh-huh.
was about to explode back onto the national stage
Right.
with the Missouri Compromise.
The Missouri Compromise was a pivotal moment in American history,
Okay.
highlighting the deep divisions and anxieties
Surrounding slavery.
surrounding the expansion of slavery.
In 1819, Missouri applied for statehood,
Right.
and the question arose, would it be a slave state or a free state?
Big question.
This seemingly straightforward question
Right.
triggered a fierce debate
It did.
that nearly tore the nation apart.
Adding Missouri as a slave state
Okay.
would have tipped the balance of power in the Senate.
In favor of slave states.
And in favor of slave states, exactly.
And it also raised the critical question of whether slavery will be allowed to expand westward.
Big question.
It's incredible how this one question about Missouri's statehood
Right.
brought the issue of slavery front and center.
It's a testament to the power of symbolism
Yeah.
and the deep-seated anxieties surrounding the issue of slavery.
So the nation was at a crossroads,
It was.
and the decisions made
regarding Missouri
regarding Missouri. Yeah.
would have profound implications
For the future.
for the future of the nation.
So what happened? Did the country erupt into civil war right then and there?
Not quite, but it came close.
Okay.
A New York congressman, James Talmadge Jr.,
Okay.
threw a wrench in the gears.
What did he do?
He proposed an amendment that would gradually emancipate slaves in Missouri. This sparked outrage among Southern slaveholders
I bet.
and ignited a fierce debate in Congress.
Talk about adding fuel to the fire.
Right.
It must have felt like the country was on the verge of collapse.
The stakes were incredibly high.
Yeah,
This wasn't just about Missouri.
right.
It was about the future of slavery in the United States.
And enter Henry Clay, Speaker of the House,
The great compromiser.
known for his ability to forge compromises to try and save the day.
Clay, who also had presidential ambitions,
Okay.
was desperate to find a solution
Makes sense.
that would prevent the Union from fracturing.
Okay.
After months of heated debate and political maneuvering,
Right.
he brokered a deal known as the Missouri Compromise,
So what was the magic solution that held the nation together,
at least for the time being.
at least for the time being?
Well, the compromise had three main components.
Okay.
First, Maine would be admitted to the Union.
As a free state.
As a free state, yes.
Hmm.
Balancing Missouri's entry as a slave state. Second, slavery would be prohibited
Okay.
north of the 36-degree 30-ORSHA parallel.
36 degrees, 30 or apparent.
Louisiana Purchase territory.
Okay.
This imaginary line
Right.
would effectively divide the nation into slave and free territory.
So they drew a line on a map and called it a day.
Well, it was more complicated than that.
Okay.
The Missouri Compromise was really just a temporary fix.
It quieted the immediate crisis, but didn't resolve the underlying issue of slavery.
Exactly. It merely postponed the inevitable conflict
Right.
that would eventually lead to the Civil War.
It's amazing how this period...
Often portrayed as a time of unity, was
Right.
actually a time of immense change and growing tension.
And these tensions came to a head
Yes, they did.
in the very messy election of
And-
1824.
The election of 1824.
You had four major candidates vying for the presidency.
Oh, yeah.
John Quincy Adams, Henry Clay,
Right.
William Crawford, and Andrew Jackson.
It was a highly contested election,
I bet.
with no clear winner emerging from the Electoral College.
Oh, wow.
Jackson, the war hero, won the popular vote,
Okay.
but didn't secure a majority of electoral votes.
So what happened?
This threw the election to the House of Representatives,
Okay.
as stipulated by the 12th Amendment.
Talk about a constitutional crisis waiting to happen.
Yeah.
So what happened next?
How did the House decide?
How did the House of Representatives decide the fate of the nation?
Well, this is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Henry Clay, who had finished fourth in the electoral vote count
Right?
and was thus eliminated from contention,
Yeah.
used his influence as Speaker of the House to support John Quincy Adams.
Okay.
Adams ultimately won the presidency,
Okay.
much to the dismay of Andrew Jackson and his supporters.
So Jackson gets the most votes from the people,
Right.
but Adams ends up becoming president.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem very democratic.
Jackson and his supporters cried foul,
I bet.
claiming that Clay had brokered a corrupt bargain with Adams,
Oh, wow.
promising him the position of Secretary of State
Right.
in exchange for his support in the House.
Sounds pretty shady. So was it a corrupt bargain or just savvy political maneuvering?
I guess that's for history to decide.
Now, in the midst of all this political drama,
Right.
there's a remarkable side story playing out.
Okay.
The reconciliation of two founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams.
It's a story of forgiveness, reconciliation,
Okay.
and the enduring power of friendship.
Oh, wow.
These two giants of the American Revolution,
Right.
who had been bitter political rivals and personal enemies
Wow.
for decades,
Yeah.
rekindled their friendship
That's amazing.
in their twilight years.
Their story is a reminder
It is.
that even the most bitter of rivals can find common ground
They can.
and mend broken relationships.
It happens.
But before we dive into the details
Okay.
of their reconciliation,
All right.
we're going to pick up their story next time.
Sounds good.
When we continue our deep dive into the era of good feelings.
Or perhaps the era of not so good feelings.
Right. Join us then. Welcome back. Before we left off, we were talking about the election of 1824.
Oh, yeah. Wild one.
And then the reconciliation of Thomas Jefferson and John Adams.
That's right.
Crazy how history can throw curveballs.
It really is.
Things are never as simple as they seem.
Definitely not. The era of good feelings was full of contradictions,
Right.
political rivalries, but with this veneer of unity,
Yeah.
economic turmoil simmering just below the surface,
Right.
and those deep-seated anxieties about slavery.
Yeah. And speaking of curveballs,
Okay.
we were talking about how Jefferson and Adams,
Right.
they both died on July 4th, 1826.
The 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence.
Exactly. But there's another founding father
Oh, yeah.
whose death kind of adds to the myth of this period.
James Monroe.
James Monroe.
Yeah. He was president during this, supposedly harmonious era. And he also died on July 4th.
Really?
But 5 years later, in 1831.
3 presidents, all key figures in the Revolution, dying on the anniversary of American independence.
It's pretty incredible.
You can't make this stuff up.
It really adds to the feeling that this was a pivotal moment.
Right.
The generation that fought for independence,
Yeah.
established the government,
Yeah.
guided the nation through its early years.
Yeah.
They were passing from the scene.
And a new generation.
Exactly.
Shaped by different experiences, facing new challenges,
Right.
stepping into the spotlight.
Makes you wonder what they thought.
I know. What did they think about the legacy they were inheriting?
A nation expanding westward,
Right.
grappling with slavery, undergoing huge economic and political transformation.
Makes you think.
The seeds of future conflict were there.
Yeah, they were. Okay, so we've talked about the Supreme Court,
Uh-huh.
the economic woes, the Missouri Compromise,
Right.
a really contentious election.
Yeah.
But let's circle back to Jefferson and Adams,
Okay.
that reconciliation. I'm really curious how their friendship fell apart
Yeah.
and then miraculously came back together.
Well, their friendship goes all the way back to the Revolution.
Right.
Worked closely together.
Yeah.
Declaration of Independence, other key documents.
Sure.
But their relationship really fractured during that election of 1800.
That was when Adams, a Federalist, was president,
Right.
and Jefferson, a Democratic Republican, challenged him
And won.
and won. Must have been a bitter pill to swallow.
It was a super contentious election.
Yeah,
Exposed deep ideological divisions.
I bet.
And, the new nation was still figuring things out.
Right, so the relationship soured.
Yeah. They basically stopped talking for years.
Wow. Can you imagine not speaking to a close friend for years?
Especially someone you've shared so much with.
I know, right?
It really speaks to the intensity of their convictions and just how personal those political battles could get.
So how'd they finally bridge that divide?
It took years.
Yeah.
But in 1812,
Okay.
their mutual friend, Dr. Benjamin Rush,
I've heard of him.
prominent physician,
Yeah.
signer of the Declaration,
Right.
he urged them to reconcile.
It's amazing how a third party can step in.
Sometimes it takes that outside perspective.
Yeah. To heal old wounds.
Rush really understood how important their friendship was,
Yeah.
not just for them, but for the whole nation.
Yeah, I can see that.
Their reconciliation, it symbolized bridging political divides.
Right.
Finding common ground even when you disagree.
Powerful. So did they just pick up where they left off?
Not exactly.
Oh, okay.
Their letters, they're fascinating.
Hey.
Went on for 14 years.
Wow.
Until they died in 1826.
Wow. Didn't shy away from politics, did they?
No, they didn't. But they also connected on other things.
Like what?
A love of learning,
Okay.
concern for the future of the Republic,
Sure.
reflections on life and legacy.
It's so human, isn't it?
It
You can disagree strongly with someone,
Yeah,
but still have respect, even affection.
exactly.
Yeah.
Their story shows us that relationships are complicated.
Right.
Even bitter rivals
Yeah.
can find ways to connect
As humans.
and appreciate each other.
One thing that really struck me,
Okay.
their discussion about who would write the history of the Revolution.
Yeah.
Worried the true story would get lost.
They were. All the complexities, the nuances,
Yeah.
lost to time or distorted.
They were very aware of the power of narrative,
Oh, yeah.
the potential for bias, misinterpretation.
Absolutely. They understood that history is always written from a certain viewpoint.
Right.
There's always more to the story.
Makes you think about how we interpret history today.
It does.
Whose voices are we hearing? Whose stories get told?
Right.
Are we getting the full picture?
Those are the questions to ask.
I know. Are we getting the whole story or just a selective version?
It's our responsibility
Yeah.
to look at those narratives critically. Consider different perspectives.
Yeah.
And be aware of the biases that shape how history is presented.
Their concerns,
They resonate today.
don't they?
Yeah.
We're still figuring out historical interpretation.
We are.
That need for inclusivity, accuracy
Yeah.
in how we understand the past.
Absolutely. It's an ongoing process.
It is.
Requires vigilance.
Right.
Willingness to challenge our own assumptions.
Okay, so we've explored the legal battles,
Yeah.
the economic turmoil,
Yeah.
the political maneuvering,
Uh-huh.
even those personal dramas
Right.
of this so-called era of good feelings.
Yeah.
But what does it all mean for us today? Why should we care
It's a great question.
about these events from 200 years ago?
It gets to the heart of why we study history.
Yeah, I agree.
The era of good feelings might seem distant,
Sure.
irrelevant even,
Yeah,
but it's full of lessons for us.
I can see that.
It reminds us that even times of peace and prosperity,
Right.
they can hide underlying tension challenges.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's easy to think our problems are unique.
Right. Like we're the only ones.
Yeah, like no one's ever dealt with this before.
But history shows us that every generation
Right.
faces its own problems.
And the choices we make today
They have
for
consequences.
generations to come.
The era of good feelings,
Yeah.
it was a time of transformation.
Okay.
The young nation was still finding itself,
Yeah.
its identity,
Right.
its values,
Yeah.
its place in the world.
So many of the issues they dealt with.
Yeah.
Balancing the power between states and the federal government.
Uh-huh.
The government's role in the economy,
Right.
the expansion of slavery,
Yeah.
how to interpret history.
We're still talking about these things,
Right. It's like we're having the same conversations.
just in different contexts.
Exactly.
History gives us that broader perspective,
I think so.
helps us understand where our current challenges come from.
By studying the past,
Yeah.
we gain insights into the present
The future, even.
and the future.
We can learn from mistakes
Yeah.
and successes
And hopefully make better decisions.
as we face our own complexities.
So, the era of good feelings.
It wasn't all sunshine and roses.
It wasn't a time of change, upheaval,
It set the stage.
for those defining moments in American history.
Exactly. Progress and conflict.
Right.
It reminds us that history is never simple.
It's not.
It's a tapestry.
Yeah.
Events, perspectives.
All woven together.
We're all part of this story.
We are. And we have a responsibility
We do.
to learn from the past, engage with the present,
Right.
and shape the future.
Well said.
Now, let's shift gears a bit
Okay.
and look at another fascinating part of this era. So we've been going deep on this time in American history.
Right.
It's often called the era of good feelings, but
Yeah, not so much, really.
we've seen how much more complicated it was.
Oh, yeah. Way more nuanced.
Politically, legally, economically, you name it,
Socially, too.
right? And that tension
Especially around slavery.
would lead to the Civil War eventually.
Exactly.
It's crazy to think about everything that happened during Monroe's presidency.
I know, right? Just 8 years.
But in those 8 years, you have the Supreme Court expanding federal power,
Right.
the country going through its first major recession,
Uh-huh.
the debate over slavery getting more intense,
Definitely heating up.
and the last of the founding fathers leaving the scene.
A lot packed into a short time.
It really sets the stage for everything that comes next.
It does, yeah.
The Missouri Compromise might have been a Band-Aid,
Right. Just kicking the can down the road.
but it shows that divide between North and South getting wider.
And that divide's not going away.
And then the corrupt bargain in the election of 1824
Oh, yeah. That was a turning point.
really set the stage for Andrew Jackson and populism.
It's like a domino effect, you know?
I know, right?
One event leads to another and another.
It's fascinating how it all ripples through time.
History's not just a bunch of isolated incidents.
It's this constant flow.
Exactly. Like a river. Everything's connected.
And the choices made back then have consequences we're still dealing with.
Absolutely.
Makes you think about what's happening right now that'll shape the future.
It does, yeah.
What will people say about our time 100 years from now?
That's the question, isn't it?
We're all making history right now,
We are.
whether we realize it or not.
Our choices, our actions, all of it has an impact.
We've only just scratched the surface.
Yeah, just dipped our toes in.
There's always more to discover.
Oh, absolutely. History's a bottomless well.
Always new angles to consider,
New things to learn.
new stories to uncover.
Always.
But the main thing I hope you take away from this
Yeah.
is that the era of good feelings was anything but.
It was a time of huge change, huge challenges.
And the consequences of that time.
They echo through history.
It's a reminder that the past isn't really gone.
It's still with us.
It's in our laws, our culture, how we see the world.
And by studying it,
Yeah.
we can understand ourselves better.
And the world we live in.
We can learn from those who came before us.
And make better choices.
Hopefully.
It's been an amazing journey,
It has.
exploring this period in American history.
So much to think about.
The era of good feelings, or maybe...
The era of not so good feelings.
Exactly. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
My pleasure.
Keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep learning.
Couldn't have said it better myself.